recording today. So just out of interest, has anyone seen a nutritional therapist before? Just put your hands up if you guys have. Okay, great. A couple of you there. Okay, so I'll start with a little bit about me. So I was diagnosed with vitiligo about 20 years ago. I'm not here to tell you how I've cured myself or anything like that, but I hope to just offer some advice on how lifestyle and nutrition can help support that, and just have a deeper understanding about the importance of nutrition and the impact it has on sort of chronic conditions such as vitiligo. I'm sure, like me, you've all probably tried various sort of diets and cures, and yeah, it kind of all gets a bit overwhelming. So I'm hoping to just strip things back, to just start back to sort of basics and just sort of eliminate all the mental exhaustion of where to start. So how it started for me was I suffer with a number of autoimmune conditions, and as I said, vitiligo started about 20 years ago. However, I eventually did get diagnosed with celiac, but up until that point I was really suffering with sort of lots of ailment problems, chronic fatigue, joint issues, and when I got my diagnosis, I wanted to sort of reverse some of the damage from the celiac disease, and also just remove some of the crippling effects from the condition that I had. Hence, that sort of motivated me to sort of look at diet and come off a lot of the prescription drugs I was on, trialing and erroring, and the side effects from all of that. What I found, which was quite a lovely side effect, is over a period of time I regained some of my repigmentation, which alluded to loads of questions of, you know, how and why it worked. Following the birth of my son, who too was celiac, I went on to study nutrition to really get sort of like a deeper understanding of why it affects not only just the condition, but how it just has such a substantial effect on your mental health well-being. And for me, I suffered with all of the above, and for some that can look like depression, some that can look like panic disorders, or for others it could be sort of multiple autoimmune conditions that come and live alongside vitiligo. So going on to study that, I just wanted to be able to offer some sort of real sort of rationale behind why that worked, and going on to study allowed me to do that, and that's what I'm here to do and discuss today. So what to expect from today is we'll have a little chat about nutritional therapies. Some of you have had that experience before, others not so much, so I'll talk a little bit about that. And understanding the immune system and autoimmunity, we'll go over that. The importance of diet and lifestyle, and food prescription. Obviously, I'll go into as much as I can in the time I have available. So, what is nutritional therapy? So many of you may have heard of sort of looking at treating the root cause of something rather than sort of supporting the symptom. Essentially, as practitioners, what we look at is we consider the fact that other than identical twins, everybody has their own genetic makeup, and you know we all have our own sort of blueprint. So everybody responds differently to environmental factors, diet, lifestyle, our perception to stress. And even twins, they have their own individual makeup from the expression of environmental factors. So fundamentally, what happens when disease takes place is an aging process. And the DNA proteins that make up our cells, which are made up of healthy fats known as lipids, which construct the membrane of our cells, they start accumulating damage from factors like environmental stress, home stress, toxins from food, our environment, and that starts having a knock-on effect on cellular integrity, which then perpetuates into disease. In our case, it's vitiligo. So what we consider to what attributes to the cellular damage, which then perpetuates into disease, is We've got at the bottom there antecedents, and those are things like our genes, our genetic makeup. We factor in what the health of the mother and father was upon conception, and we kind of then consider the triggers. What kind of things would have sort of initiated? Normally by the time we get to vitiligo, you would have probably undergone sort of other underlying conditions like gut issues or anxiety, or there's generally underlying factors, and that's what we sort of take into account to what expresses these genes. Like I was saying before, we may have certain genes that carry predispositions to chronic disease, but they don't necessarily get turned on. What turns them on is generally environmental factors, diet, nutrition, stress. It's very individual for each person. The triggers might be things like long-term illness, stressful environment, lack of sleep, poor quality sleep, and the Western diet, which is what we'll be looking at today. And then take into account mediators. So by the time we've had a trigger response from our immune system, what's really driving this sort of, the condition that we're dealing with here, it's vitiligo, what's really sort of driving that? And those are generally lifestyle measures that we're living in today, sort of that hamster wheel, the lack of nutrients in our diet, stressful environment, and we're sort of living in an era where there's a lot of social pressures that attribute to that, lead to sort of poor quality sleep, scrolling at night, the blue screen, the lack of quality of sleep that we're experiencing in this sort of modern day lifestyle, I should refer to. And then what we do as practitioners, we then unpick through these factors and then create plans and resolutions in addressing these challenges in order to restore the body back to homeostasis, which is when the body's got the ability to self-regulate itself and the immune system is then responding in the way that we would like. So, what is autoimmunity? So the immune system, it's a very sophisticated and complex integration of a network of cells which communicate with each other, and depending on what pathogen and what the host might be, it initiates and triggers different cells to respond to fight different bacterial infections or pathogens, whatever we might be dealing with. So, I mean, science is continuously sort of evolving. COVID is such a true representation of that. The immune system is so complex, and it's constantly sort of being understood in sophistication in the way it responds. But really, to extrapolate, just basics is with autoimmunity, we have two sort of tranches. We've got the Th1, which is the T helper cells with Th1 immunity, and the T helper cells too in Th2 immunity. And they both respond differently to different type of infections, parasites or bacterial infection, or as with autoimmunity, it's normally sort of like external factors that can offset the immune system. An overexpression of Th2 can sort of lead to things like allergies and asthma, those kind of conditions, atopic type conditions that we might experience. However, with Th1, an overexpression of that, the body ends up sort of responding to an autoimmune profile, which is things like vitiligo, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, celiac disease. And instead of fighting these invaders, unfortunately, the immune system mistakes the body for its own defense system, and it starts in this case with attacking the melanocytes, which then offers the pigmentation. However, this is nuanced slightly because there are some autoimmune conditions that can fall into 2H2. So what we want to look at when sort of having this modulated is balancing both Th1 and Th2, so the immune response is then acting in the way that we actually desire it to work. There's lots of talk about what kind of causes it. Is it kind of genetic factor? And yes, it's autoimmunity. It definitely holds weight, 30% only. But as I said, it's normally the expression of these genes are triggered by environment, and that's probably the greatest. That's probably the greatest weighting factor on what switches on these genes. And that could be multifactorial. So that could be environmental sensitivities, environment pollution, food sensitivities, pollution over the years, family circumstances, diet low in nutrients. Just running on that hamster wheel, and if you're kind of like going on years and end of sort of dealing with so much, and it could be a really stressful event that takes over, and that just initiates the propagation of autoimmunity. Or it could be actually, you're on a sort of fast-paced life, on a poor diet, and then there could be one life event. It could be happy, it could be sad, and that just initiates this switch on of the genes for autoimmunity. The hygiene hypothesis, what we're talking about here is kind of being brought up in an era where we were just kind of sanitizing everything. I don't know if you recall sort of detailing all your surfaces and bleaching everything. What that actually happens is you're killing all the bacteria that our immune system actually acquires to build up tolerance for sort of these bacteria and these infections. So when it does kind of come into contact with our immune system knows how to react to it appropriately. But when all those have been depleted through over sanitizing, we're not allowing our immune system to build up. So then, in the case of autoimmunity, when it does come into contact with things that our body might not necessarily like, it's just responding in an inappropriate manner. So we're really going back to just basics of finding actually what switched these genes on. Is it your immune system, or is it current circumstances? Like I said, those kind of factors all sort of provoke allergies, further provoke chemical sensitivity. So when you're dealing with vitiligo, you probably your immune system probably coping on with a lot more than just sort of dealing with vitiligo per se. It's probably dealing with a lot of environmental factors, and sort of just the nervous system is really probably being challenged with so many factors from our environment and the personal circumstances as well. Stress is probably one of the biggest things to just switch on these genes. So we factor in things like that. And there's a huge correlation with autoimmunity and our gut health. And what studies are showing, and I've put quite a few sort of references there for anyone that might be interested, is there's a huge correlation associated with the initiation of autoimmune disease, especially with conditions like vitiligo, with the gut integrity. So our intestinal wall should kind of, it has like what we refer to as the lumen of our gut. It should actually be intact like that. However, when it's dealing with all of the above sort of infection, poor diet, referring back to the hygiene hypothesis, environmental factors, we get a bit of permeability. So the gap junctions in our intestinal wall is kind of what we refer to as leaky. So when we're ingesting food, it's then entering systemically into our bloodstream, and it's initiating all these sort of immune responses that our body just cannot deal with. And an overload of that over time just exacerbates a lot of these symptoms that we experience and just challenges the immune system more so. So we look at sort of repairing that to support those, so food particles and proteins remain within the gut lumen, so then we're actually absorbing nutrients from the food we are consuming. And it's hypothesized that the modulating the microbiome within our gut can actually sort of not reverse, but actually modulate our autoimmune response into working in a more even keel way. So that's just a representation of how profound and the impact of food, just having the right microbiome from the foods that we consume, from the variety of fruits and vegetables, which I'll come on to, can actually have an impact on our immune system. I've got vaccinations there, that's kind of like probably, and cancer, there's probably a whole other discussion, whether it's the vaccination per se, or whether it's some ingredients within vaccinations that offset the immune system to respond in an inappropriate manner, is the jury still out there. But there's definitely the correlation there of offsetting the immune system in a way that we might not necessarily want it to be responding to. Just to kind of give a sort of a representation of how profound the microbiome is 2 hours of stress can actually modulate our microbiome within our gut completely. So if we're really stressed, the impact it has in changing the microbiome, when I talk about microbiome, it's the good bacteria which our bodies require in order to respond to just functioning efficiently, that can be depleted. And without that, we haven't got the sort of resources within our body to respond to certain conditions or just lifestyle measures. How do we balance the immune system? So the best way to look at this is kind of looking at your immune system, just kind of attaining good critical health. So even sort of common coughs and colds, they all require a robust immune system, which we just seem to kind of lend to when we've got the winter months coming near us, and we just kind of think, okay, what should we do to support our immune system? However, we need to kind of look at this more pragmatically and think, actually, rather than looking at one food group that we might change or a superfood, looking at changing or implementing a lifestyle change to ultimately modulate our immune system. I've put stress management, even though diet has a profound effect, but stress management is imperative with autoimmunity. It drives, when we're in a flare, what I call a flare, when, with vitiligo, the pigmentation is just kind of, there's just no stop button to it. Stress management is really imperative, and we want to really slow down our nervous system in order to stop driving the immune system in the way that it's been driven. So all infections they rely on this network of cells to respond to the stimuli in an appropriate way. We do obtain that from diet. A lot of that is depleted from the Western diet, which just sort of accelerates the aging process of the cells that I spoke about earlier. And even though our sort of nervous system, when we're talking about slowing down our stress hormones and stuff, though we think of the brain and the gut as two separate entities, we really want to sort of look at it as one entity. Though they're sort of housed in different places, they merge together by one of the nerve the biggest nerve in our body, which is the vagus nerve. And so if we're kind of stressed, the vagus nerve is not only affecting sort of our stress response neurologically, it's actually having a direct impact on our gut health as well. So when we're sort of looking at supporting our body, we want to be looking at it by supporting our nervous system in order to slow down the propagation of an immune response. Things that impact that is, your modern day stresses of, again, I'm saying like really stressful lives with work, balancing the home life, and even food has just getting good food in your diet has become such an issue for so many people. Rather than we're going back to thinking about, okay, what we're having to do, we're actually looking at what we can fit in our lifestyles to just get food in. That really compromises our food choices a lot of the time. Nutritional supplements, we know with autoimmunity, especially with vitiligo, there's a higher demand for supplements and nutrients such as vitamin D, which modulates our immune system, and things like copper and zinc have shown promise in sort of bringing back some repigmentation for some individuals, so that's quite imperative. Amino acid phenylalanine, which is a peptide from a protein, has shown some advantage on some repigmentation. Herbs like ashwagandha, which is a beautiful herb in calming down the nervous system, but it also offers some repigmentation for some as well. Whether it's because it calms the nervous system down or whether it has a direct impact, that's still, the jury's still out there. But none of these supplemental choices have sort of the effect that we're looking for with vitiligo if we haven't managed stress and diet. So again, things work better synergistically. If we're applying one, we're not necessarily going to get that outcome that we might be sort of alluding to. And here in this case, it's about rebalancing the Th1 dominance. So why is the Western diet creating such disease? So it's publicly discussed now. It's especially on the back of COVID. It's a real risk factor to be kind of overweight, have diabetes, have a lot of the sort of chronic conditions that we're dealing with in this modern day lifestyle, and a lot of that is driven by a nutrient low diet. And why that is compromising our makeup is it just causes such inflammation in our body. It's starving our cells from the nutrients it requires to run efficiently, and it's just kind of it's just compromising the way our immune system is responding to. It's just giving this inability to communicate with the cells to communicate with each other. So it's going back to what I was saying, just treating the body as a whole, and not just looking at it as treating vitiligo, but just thinking about how certain elements in our body, a lot like a car, I hate to sort of use this analogy, but without the right sort of the components, you're not going to be running the body efficiently. And the Western diet starves our body of all the nutrients it requires to run efficiently. They're highly processed, so it's depleted a lot of the nutrient profile. The healthy fats that our cells are made up of are depleted, and they're replaced with all the processed oils from vegetable fats, saturated fats, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are really sort of processed under high heat consumption, so it destroys any valuable nutrients we want from the healthy fats, which kind of just lends itself to the hardened fats, the oxidized fats, which our cells just simply just cannot function with. So we're looking for a real robust cellular function with the poor vegetable fats, the margarines. It's just making it more rigid and not allowing them to communicate appropriately. It's a lot of the processed meals are deep fried. They lack fiber, which our gut completely thrives on. With the lack of fiber, just to sort of demonstrate and put in perspective, I mean, the studies show that 100 grams, countries that naturally are consuming a lot more fiber, of 100 grams per day in comparison to the UK 15 grams a day, actually have much lower rates of chronic diseases like bowel cancer. Without the fiber, the good bacteria is not able to thrive. We're not able to modulate our immune system. We're sort of reabsorbing a lot of the toxins that we need to deplete, because of course fiber helps keep our bowels moving and removing any toxins from our body, any sort of build up in our liver. It's allowing us to eliminate all of that. We suffer massively as a nation with constipation. So then we're just reabsorbing all the toxins that our body needs to expel, which then again we're just off keel. Our immune system is in overdrive, and we're just in this vicious cycle. And high sugar, that kind of is not just exclusive to autoimmunity, but just generally as well. There's so much out there with how it just leads to inflammation. That's a whole another conversation, but sugar is just eliminating it as much as possible, reducing it. It's just going to allow your body, allow your immune system to have a chance to self-regulate in the way it wants, and just reduce some of the inflammation. And then when you're topping that with fizzy drinks, a lump of sugar in your morning tea, in your coffee, it becomes a load of dominance from inflammation from sugar on itself, and you're kind of getting a lot of that in your processed jars of your pasta sauces and things like that, the hidden sugars and the hidden salts. The salts are kind of they're really processed, so you're not getting the mineral salts that you might get from sea salt, you might get from Himalayan salt. You're really getting a processed form of just sodium, which alludes to kind of high blood pressure, inflammation in the body. which just does not allow your body to just regulate in the way we want. It leads to more anxiety. It drives a lot of the mental health conditions, which you're already challenged with if you're dealing with a chronic condition like autoimmunity and vitiligo. And then it just compromises the gut and brain axis that I was talking about earlier. They're unable to communicate. They're just kind of on this sort of fight with each other, which is when people experience a lot of blood sugar dysregulation. They're feeling quite depleted, running on empty. So you can see how this just forms into a vicious cycle. Sleep, again, it's I mentioned it earlier, it's just so underrated how important sleep is. It's the only time our body gets to repair. It's the only time our cells get to regenerate. So if we're putting all the work in through nutrition and managing our nervous system, however, the body's not allowed to replenish through efficient and good quality sleep, which is quite disrupted now with the blue light from our phone, stressful lives, etc. We're just sort of on lockerheads, just not allowing our body to ever recover. So sleep really is kind of so imperative. We need the melatonin level, which is our sleep hormone, to rise quite naturally. However, with sugars and salts, that's just again interfered. The environment, sort of exposure to chemicals. Generally, our liver is really efficient at detoxifying. However, if it's oversensitized, which it is in autoimmunity, because there's normally an overload of stress on our liver, that heavily needs to be considered. So things like environmental toxins, like from candles, perfumes, scents, bleach, can often sort of drive our immune system towards this autoimmunity immunity state. Okay, so what comprises of good diet and lifestyle? So referring back to the initial screen I showed you with the framework of, not one size fits all, it's pretty much the same with diet. What works for one person may not necessarily work for the second. However, there are some key things that we can just employ that we know are staples, which we can take away when it comes to food. We want to be reverting back to a more whole food, organic sort of way of eating, as opposed to a processed-led one. Whole foods is foods that are in its natural state. So you're talking about your fruits, your vegetables, things like burgers and chips and stuff. So you're really kind of getting inventive with your foods, so making them from scratch, from home. What they contain is the B vitamins our body requires. They're sort of involved in so many chemical exchanges in our body, and without those, our body cannot communicate and function in the way it does. And again, the Western diet depletes, and it's just so undernourished in all those nutrients. And without the B vitamins, a lot of exchanges in our bodies can't take place, including energy production. The fruits and vegetables, again, they feed the good bacteria because they're so rich in fibre. So you often may hear prebiotic and probiotic. So probiotic is the good bacteria, and the prebiotic is the fibre which feeds the good bacteria. So it's almost like the fertilizer of your garden, really. So we need an array of those. We need to have a plate as colourful as possible, so you're getting diversity of phytonutrients. And what phytonutrients are? They are sort of compounds within the fruits and vegetables that reduce the inflammation and repair cellular damage that we occur from environmental factors, distress, all the things that I've spoken about. And having a diversity of these just lends itself to your body establishing less intolerances. When you're over-consuming the same foods over and over again, you're more likely to develop sensitivities and intolerances to those. So you want to be getting a diversity of foods. Going back to the point I made earlier, our body just works better synergistically rather than in isolation. So we want to get a whole diverse source of nutrients, minerals and vitamins which we get from whole foods. So you can incorporate that through salads. Green juices are a fantastic way, smoothies, vegetable crudettes with hummus. marinating your vegetables, half to 2/3 of your plate should actually comprise of your vegetables. I'm going to sort of mention whole grains because they are really important, but they can be problematic for autoimmunity, which I'll come on to in the next slide. So good quality water, hydration. You cannot underestimate, how much our body just requires water, good quality water as well. At cellular level, it provides shape and structure in regulating our body temperature. It aids digestion, absorption of food. It allows nutrients to travel inside and outside of the cells. It avoids things like constipation, muscle cramps, headaches, bladder infections. You want to be aiming for at least 2 litres of water per day. And if you're somebody who exercises a lot and you're always on the go, or you tend to sort of lend yourself towards more feeling more thirsty, you want to increase that with an extra 2 pints. Mention protein there. So protein is so imperative for our body when it's undergoing anything in recovery, whether that's from exercise or chronic disease. And when it's in chronic disease, the requirements for protein are going to be higher because that's how our organs repair, through the amino acids from the protein. However, this should be from a varied source. If it's heavily lending itself towards meats, you can send your body into inflammation, which we want to avoid, and it's quite hard to digest meat. So we want to be getting a mix of protein sources. So this could be from like organic eggs, oily fish, smash I've written there, which refers to salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines and herring. These are the oily fish, which I will talk about, which are higher in omega-3s, which reduce inflammation. Going for grass-fed, as where it's available, is even through butter, is great because we're able to, by the animal consuming grass-fed food, they're then converting it into vitamin A, which is really imperative for skin health and for cell-to-cell communication. So meats, we want to be kind of just consuming no more than sort of a palm size form, and the rest should be from plant bases like your legumes, your fermented tofu, your nuts, seeds and lentils. So you're really getting a diversity of the amino acids and the protein sources across the week. Eggs and fish are such a great source of protein. However, I mentioned about its, the availability of the omega-3, which is, the healthy fats that we require. You may have seen quite often, it's in the headlines, especially on the back of COVID, how it's really important to sort of have your omega-3, which you might see as a cod liver oil or a fish oil tablet. And the reason for that is omega-3, it reduces inflammation. We need both omega-6 and omega-3. However, we need a greater ratio of the omega-3. The Western diet is really dominant in omega-6, hence it drives a lot of the inflammatory conditions. And without sort of the omega-3, our hormones struggle, the cells cannot communicate with each other. Our body gets into a state of inflammation. Our collagen from our skin is not able to repair. Our brain is sort of made up of 70% fat, so we're literally starving our brain of the nutrient and the fuel it needs in order for it to operate. A lot of cognitive sort of disorders, initiate and propagate because the lack of omega-3 in our diet, because we're on sort of such a Western diet, and it's not allowing the immune system to modulate in the way it wants, because it's not getting the required amount of healthy fats within our diet. Fats have got such a bad reputation over the years, how it's really important to sort of differentiate good fats from bad fats. I think that's got quite lost in translation due to media attention, etc. But really sort of reining in the healthy fats from your nuts, your seeds, cold pressed organic olive oil, ghee, your nuts, your seeds, avocados, all of those. We want to really get them in as much as possible. To put in perspective, studies have shown in placebo trials as well. People that were taking an omega-3 supplement actually were able to lower their antidepressants and modulate their immune system just by taking an omega-3 supplement. That's not even considering the dietary changes that were available to them, and you can obtain a hell of a lot of omega-3 from your dietary choices, as well as things like your zinc, which are rich in your nuts and seeds, and a lot of the vitamins, the fat solubles, like your vitamins like your A, your vitamin A, your vitamin D, your C, your B vitamins. You can get those from whole foods. Fermented foods, I've written there, you've got your organic yogurts, plant-based ones. If you're on a plant-based diet, you've got a whole load of choice, and probably more than you can sort of imagine at the moment, with almond yogurt, coconut yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir. All of these, they kind of offer a fermentation process that they go through in when they're being produced, which then feeds the good bacteria in our gut. So if you're not taking a probiotic, getting it from food choices is a great way. And as mentioned, the whole grains. I'm going to sort of come on to that, but just touching on it, you get all of your, not only your fibre, but a lot of your B vitamins from your whole grains, such as nut seeds, rice, brown rice, wild rice. Going on to that, so what is food prescription? What we know is with autoimmunity, there are some sort of strong correlations between certain proteins and compounds found within certain foods, which can exacerbate an immune response with autoimmunity that is lending itself in the dominance of Th1. So there's certain compounds found in the grains, including wheat, rice, oatmeal. It's not to say it's bad for you, it's just maybe could be due to poor gut, that your body's just not ready to take on those food groups yet. They contain compounds called lectins, which can be quite difficult to digest. And then if it's difficult to digest, we're not actually absorbing a lot of the nutrients from the food groups that we are sort of consuming. And so you're kind of on this seesaw balance of actually you're putting the right foods in, but it's this fight or flight response that's going on. However, that is nuanced. If you soak your beans and pulses or pressure cooker them, you remove a lot of the lectins, so it does make it more digestible. It is a trial and error effect. However, working alongside a practitioner, you can kind of see, when the right time might be to introduce them again, or whether you might be able to consume them in smaller amounts over a period of time. Nightshades, and those are vegetables like your tomatoes, your eggplants, as I mentioned, their potatoes and peppers. So they contain compounds called salicylates, which is the dominant ingredients in things like aspirin. And if you've got salicylate sensitivity, which is quite common with people with autoimmunity, and if you've got a histamine overload, so if you suffer with a lot of food sensitivities, hay fever, alongside your vitiligo, it may well be that the nightshade group may not just suit your immune system whilst you're trying to just get it back into a more even keel state. The sugar, again, I've spoken about it, it just drives our immune system complete AWOL. It interferes with neurotransmitters. So I think across the board, whether we're dealing with autoimmunity, we're just reducing sugar is going to just, your body's just going to thank you for that. Garlic and spirulina, that's due to how potent it is in supporting the immune system. One thing we need to sort of be really careful with is overstimulating our immune system, because that can actually drive our immune system to respond in an inappropriate way. And garlic and spirulina, they are so potent in encouraging and boosting the immune system, which is great if you don't have autoimmunity. However, if you do, it could be, the one thing you just need to just remove, because it's, you're going to be in a constant state of flare. So what is food prescription? So introducing you to client AK. This is somebody who's dealing with vitiligo. So she's a 52-year-old female city banker in Mumbai, so she's kind of exposed to a lot of environmental factors. We considered her microbiome, which is modulated and can be influenced whether you're breastfed or not. She's had quite a lot of history of antibiotic use. She's divorced. She has a vegetarian-rich diet. She travelled a lot in the back of her job, which just predisposed her to a lot of radiation, and the microbiome changed with country to country that she travelled with. She found her job highly stressful, and she was in this job for absolute years. And for her, it was a case of the straw that broke the camel's back. Of course, the predisposition was there. Her mother had celiac disease, so her immune system was lending itself towards autoimmunity. There was a history of chronic heart disease, diabetes, which again she generally ate quite well. On the back of that, she just wanted to prevent, diabetes or heart disease, because she saw it with her parents. Her diet was generally, as I said, quite healthy. However, upon sort of going through her synopsis and stuff, she was suffering with what we refer to as candida, which is a yeast overgrowth in her body. And so the diet she was actually having was feeding that bacterial overgrowth, and her diet was quite rich in natural fruits and sugars. So though it was quite healthy, it just wasn't ideal for her, because that was a fuel source for the bacterial infection she was having. She lacked protein, she was vegetarian, and she lacked a lot of vegetables, because she was very mindful of the fact that in India there was a lot of fertilizers used on the produce that they used there. However, it was she was quite open to the fact of going to certain farmers where she could sort of source those food sources. However, COVID was a huge barrier for her. She wasn't sort of going out much. Home delivery was, it varied each week for her who would sort of be able to deliver the vegetables. However, it was something we factored in. She was stressed because of her parents being quite vulnerable, and in the pandemic she lacked exercise, again because she was working from home for months now. Poor sleep, because she was, her words were Netflix binging, and that offset a new sort of infestation of her vitiligo. She suffered her first vitiligo bout in her struggles. However, topical treatment allowed some of the pigmentation back, and she was fine for years. However, unfortunately, the stress of her divorce initiated another flare-up, which didn't get worse. However, on the back of COVID, she found the spots just exacerbating, and she was just non-responsive to the steroidal cream, topical cream that she was using. So what did we go on to do? So her initial consultation, we increased her water intake, which she said was, she knew herself that had changed substantially since working from home. When she was working, her, she'd have a bottle where she'd be just getting through enough water. So there was a lot of brain fog there. We put her on an anti-candida protocol, which was to address the bacterial infection. However, we did remove the lectins to a certain degree, but mainly the salicylates, which including the garlic, to just calm her immune system down, to see whether that had an impact on her symptoms. We put her on some digestive enzymes to optimize her stomach acid levels, because she did suffer with acid reflux, and if that does come to play, you're not breaking down your food how your body necessarily needs to in order for you to absorb the nutrients from the food. So that was a real issue. There was definitely some gut permeability there. So we put her on a protocol to support the gut integrity, the gut junctions I spoke about earlier, digestive enzymes to help break down the food, and specific probiotic strains to actually just inhibit the bacterial infection. We ruled out things like H. pylori, which is quite common in tropical countries. H. pylori is a stomach bacterial infection which can deplete your stomach acid levels, and if it's a bacterial infection, we want to eliminate those potential drivers there when it comes to autoimmunity, because that could continually challenge the immune system if we don't eradicate it. However, that was Claire. We ruled out diabetes because she was waking up frequently through the night, but that was alluded to. She was drinking a lot of her liquid in the evening as opposed to across the day. Her blood levels showed her vitamin D levels were actually okay despite being in lockdown and not being outdoors as much. However, we did put her on a maintenance dose and encouraged walks first thing in the morning. And this was before it went really catastrophic in India with COVID. We spoke about and put the focus on resetting her circadian clock, which is the sleep-wake cycle, and her eating patterns. Because what was happening, because she was Netflix binging so late in the day, she'd like to graze with her food, and that would sort of then interfere with her sleep. How that actually works is if you're eating when your digestive system actually slows down in the evening, you're not allowing your sleep hormone melatonin to rise, because your body's getting confused with the signals. It's thinking, actually, I'm actually digesting food, so I'm not ready to sleep. Now, sleep hormone is signaled by sort of flight responses and when our digestive system closes down. So if you're putting food in, you're not naturally allowing your sleep hormone to rise, and then that was having a knock-on effect on her eating patterns during the day, because she was lacking energy, because she's not slept well, so she was reaching for the sugary foods, fruits and what have you. So it's a real vicious cycle that was going on. So what showed in her follow-up, her bacterial infection cleared. We put her on some antimicrobials. Her fungal infection eventually cleared. Unfortunately, due to COVID cases rising so dramatically, she wasn't able to go out for outdoor exercises, which did have an impact on her mood. Following the COVID vaccine, she ended up in a bit of a flare. Her joints suffered quite a lot on the back of an injury that she had years ago, and which required surgery. So that brought up a flare. She got in touch, and we put on some specific probiotics to eliminate the fungal infection and knock on sort of the acid reflux, which then the fungal infection subsided, and as a response, her vitiligo actually reduced quite a small amount. I did recommend a protopic of black seed oil alongside with omega-3, has shown great response to repigmentation. However, she just was content. She didn't really want to sort of take any more on. She was more focused on the hair loss that she was experiencing, just regulating her anxiety. That was a bigger problem for her. Her fatigue had reduced from 3 out of 10 to 7 out of 10, 3 being the worst it could be and 10 being the best. Her LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, was back to normal. So on the back of that, we decided to sort of tease the bacteria back in to sort of really inhibit it once and for all, and that was bringing back some of the food groups that were eliminated. And then we went in with the herbs. We increased her omega-3s, and we reintroduced the nightshades, because for her, in this case, it didn't really make a huge of a difference. She responded really well on the introduction of those, and we focused on supporting her joints, and because she was menopausal as well, we associated the hair loss for that. So we looked at target sort of nutrients for those. Bone specific nutrients to reduce the inflammation, and looked at topical sort of ointments like rosemary to condition her hair and stimulate blood flow to her brain to encourage a lot of the hair growth. So as you can see, it's kind of really individual in how people respond. For her, the biggest problem, it was the sleep, which we still are kind of working on. However, she feels that the grazing in the evening has stopped and she's feeling more regulated in her breakfast choices in the morning. And so what happens is, if going back again, if we're working against our digestive stimulation in the evening, you're having a knock-on effect when you're waking up. So if you're eating quite late in the night, your body's kind of thinking actually it's daytime, and then in the morning when it's waking up, you've got two neurotransmitters, leptin and ghrelin, which are your hunger and satiation hormones. And what happens is those are really sort of, they take a knock-on effect. So then you're making poorer food choices because you're never actually feeling satiated if those aren't switched on. And so you're lending yourself for the more calorific, sugar-dense choices, which then are just working against what your body requirements are. Again, that just accelerates the aging process, and just not allowing the repair process that we're aiming for to take place. So what are my takeaway points today? If you're looking to change, I would say looking at things, like I said earlier, making it as a lifestyle choice, eliminates things like labeling yourself, following certain diets, like, I don't know, going vegan or plant-based or whatever, but just kind of looking at doing a lifestyle change, starting with a food diary, just the basics of what you're drinking, how much you're drinking, of really doing like a self-evaluation of what you're putting in your body, sitting with yourself and reflecting on your well-being and how that's having an impact on your health. What lifestyle things are going on around you, how's your environment affecting your food choices, and are you eating on the go? All of those factors compromise with how much we're absorbing, and just really, compromises the digestive process. So if we're eating on the go, our stomach acid is not being, stimulated in the way we want in order to break the food particles down. And also just kind of thinking about how these small changes will impact your whole family. How often are you opening your bowels? You should be sort of aiming for 2 to 3 bowel movements a day. Like I said, we're in a nation where constipation is huge. Just kind of think, how can we kind of incorporate more fibres and more of the food groups that we've spoken about in small increments to make it more achievable. Just not starting sort of like full-time, just small baby steps is going to, take you a long way. What things will allow these things to facilitate? And just really having an honest conversation. We get sort of so used to taking on everything and looking after everything. We often neglect ourselves, and self-care is huge in calming down the nervous system. Really thinking about me time, are you getting enough of that? Are you able to allocate more time for that? And what kind of food choices can you swap during your day? That could be one meal you're replacing, and then eventually working yourself towards the second meal, to just better support your nutritional profile. Just, I guess the biggest thing for me is remembering prevention is always better than cure, and in the case of autoimmunity, it's always better than a relapse. And food diversity offers that platform to actually have those things and facilitate those things in place. So finally, just thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope that's been helpful. And if you guys have any questions, I'll hand you over to Abby, but if there is any specific questions you would like help with, I'm offering a free discovery call. You can my contact details are there, and if you pop me an email, I'll share with you my autoimmune ebook, which has got some great recipes for you to get started with, and hopefully encourage you on your lifestyle change and transitioning to eating your way to healthy.